The heartache and harm that comes from methamphetamine extends far beyond the user. I'm Susan Gertner, the Ramsey County Attorney and Chair of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association Meth Task Force. As a prosecutor for over 20 years, I have never seen a more frightening crime trend than methamphetamine. It destroys the lives of its users, it tears apart families, and it's an enormous public safety concern. But if we refuse to tolerate it, Minnesotans can end methamphetamine use. I hope that we can work together across each community in this state to make Minnesota meth-free.
In order to overcome the challenges created by meth, we need to understand what it is and how it affects people, their bodies, their brains, their lives, their families, and their communities. The purpose of this video is not to exaggerate the problem, to shock or scare you. What we're going to do is to give you the straight facts on how this drug is affecting our state.
When I started off in 9th grade, I was co-captain of the gymnastics varsity team, overachiever in high school. I came back late from a gymnastics meet and knew that I had finals the next day. I asked my boyfriend if I could have some of his meth so I could study, but I didn't know what it was or what it did to you or anything. I just knew that he used a drug that made him stay up. And he's like, no, I've only been using for a couple months and I think I'm addicted. And I said, people that are addicted to things are idiots. I'm a strong person and I can tell myself that I don't want to use and I'm not gonna. I said, I just want to try it. And he's like, okay. He finally gave in. And so I did it just a little bit that night and I stayed up all night, studied, I aced my finals, and I felt great. Like I could do anything. I felt like a Superman.
Methamphetamine is an artificial human-made stimulant that affects the central nervous system, as well as the heart, lungs, and brain in devastating ways. Meth is made in many different ways, but all require either ephedrine or pseudoephedrine. These are active ingredients in cold medicines like Sudafed. Meth is powerfully addictive. Dependency comes much more quickly with meth than with many other common drugs.
I said, well, I want to try that again, just to do it. And he's, no, I don't think you should, I was in 9th grade, so I had 4 years of high school left, and he was graduated already. And he said, no, you really need to focus on school, and I begged him and ended up doing it again that night and really liked it again. I stayed up for probably a day, and again, everything went really well. Everything I did was great, and I thought, this is the best thing I've ever found in my life. And then it gradually, within a couple months, had turned into using throughout the week. I'd start skipping school to do it, At that point, I still had a little control, so I decided I'm going to quit, and I'm not going to use. And then, I went about 2 weeks without using and woke up in the middle of the night freaking out that I needed meth. I was sweating and I started tearing apart my room. I was digging at my carpet with a magnifying glass, and I just wanted to get high. And I called him up because we didn't live together, obviously, bawling, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I need this drug. And he came over, and then that's when I started using more and more.
Methamphetamine is incredibly varied in its forms and use. As a powder or pill, it can come in a range of colors, from white to shades of yellow, pink, and brown. As ice, crystallized meth looks like pieces of rock candy, and any of these can be dissolved in liquid. Because of this versatility, users can smoke, snort, inject, or even eat meth to get high. Meth users don't match a single textbook description either. You may have seen these scary pictures of incarcerated meth addicts, and they are real. But not all addicts look like this. Meth users can look like anyone.
I started off with like a quarter gram, which is $25 on the street, and that would last me about a week. And then at the end of my using, when I went into jail and treatment, I was doing 7 grams a day, which is like $700 a day on the street. A little powder, a little piece of nothing was controlling my life.
What really frightens me, what really frightens other people about this drug, is that the decline is so rapid. We hear the same story from parents over and over again. I noticed that something was going on, and the next thing I knew, he was in jail. I noticed that there was a problem, and the next thing I knew, he was dead.
Well, I went from snorting it right away to smoking it because it would hurt my nose. And so I smoked it for about 2.5 years, and then I went from that to shooting it up intravenously. That I swore I would never do.
This drug takes the control.
Methamphetamine is made by mixing a toxic cocktail of ingredients, things like rubbing alcohol, drain cleaner, battery acid or sulfuric acid, starter fluid, red devil lye, and anhydrous ammonia.
Other than the limiting agent pseudoephedrine, nothing used to produce methamphetamine was ever designed for human consumption. So what you're talking about are a lot of organic solvents, a lot of industrial chemicals. The body cannot break down and metabolize those, so it gets busy trying to get rid of them as fast as it can. And when you're dehydrated, you don't produce as much urine. Some of these toxins will start to build up in you. Because they don't want other people to know that they're manufacturing methamphetamine, they'll close up all the doors and windows, put trash bags on the windows, put duct tape around the seals and the doors, put a wet towel at the bottom of the door. The vapor can't escape, so the smell can't get out. But in the process of that, they're in that chamber with all of the vaporized residue of what they're manufacturing. People who are in labs where they're actively making it will show up with some of the same signs and symptoms we see of people who have been exposed to heavy metals or people who have had industrial exposure to organic solvents. Back in the adolescent huffing days here, a lot of kids that would come in who had been huffing for days and weeks and months would actually have cavernous bodies, cavernous holes formed in the glial matter in the brain tissue. Organic solvents, by definition, are things that dissolve organic tissue. Your brain is organic tissue.
Natural deaths, accidental deaths, even homicides we've had where methamphetamine has been present in the person's system at the time of their death. Out of the 300 to 350 cases that we did last year, there were 20 cases where the toxicology was positive for amphetamine or methamphetamine. And certainly we're on track for that number this year.
I have to tell you, when we first started hearing about meth and seeing all of the terrible consequences of this drug, it just didn't seem to add up. People of my generation remember the speed of the 70s. That was meth too, but it had a different molecular structure. What we had before was L-meth. What we see today is D-meth. The simple flip of a molecule causes a devastating increase in the drug's potency.
Methamphetamine as a chemical has changed over the years. Stimulants have been around for a long time, so has amphetamines. What we have today is simply a bigger, nastier tater tot in the same hot dish. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's more plentiful, it's stronger, has a bigger effect to it. It's simply better dope.
This new meth is what is being made in the labs of Minnesota today.
Even though the changes in our law, which restricted the sale of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine and put those behind the counter, made some big differences and resulted in drops in the number of meth labs in our state, we still see these labs. Last year in Dakota County, we had 6 labs. 3 were in cars, 3 were found in homes. It doesn't have to be in a home. They can be in hotel rooms, in the back seats of cars, on the side of a road even. These labs can be anywhere.
Meth has been in Minnesota and throughout the country a moving target, and we need to adjust to meth as meth adjusts to our methods.
Science can't keep up with social trends, so it's only now that we really are getting our arms around the science related to the cocaine abuse that occurred in the 90s. The problem is that things change so rapidly. You're always looking at things in the past as if in a rearview mirror. You're always seeing what the situation used to be And what we need to do is to have some system which allows us to monitor and to know what's going on in our society now and saying, how do we make a difference in the lives of these people that we see today?
My message has been, trust what you see in your community. Trust what your cops tell you. Trust what you learn from public health, from the social workers, from the people in the treatment centers, and believe what they're telling us about the scope of the problem right here.
One of the most dangerous meth labs that we've uncovered in recent years in Dakota County was in West St. Paul, in a home where significant quantities of meth were being produced, where 2 small children under the age of 5 lived. This was a home that was booby-trapped. It had guns throughout the home, which is often found in areas where meth is being produced. At the bottom of the basement steps where the lab was a large bear trap that was set right inside the basement door where the meth lab was, obviously a significant danger to law enforcement officials or anyone else who was coming into that home.
These photos of a St. Paul meth lab are classic. See the absolute chaos, the filth, the lack of care in which these children live. And this is a situation which is common because it is a lifestyle created by a drug that profoundly changes the people that use it. So not only do we seem to have a continuing problem, we have a problem that probably hasn't leveled off yet. And whether we're 4th in the nation or 18th in the nation, we are one of the states where this is really quite a large concern.
If you go home tonight, dial up Google on your computer and type in methamphetamine recipe, you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of pages to look at. I will tell you right now that a lot of those recipes are wrong. You're not talking about people that are chemists and pharmacists. You're talking about Larry the Cable Guy out in the ice house. He's pouring A into B and hoping it doesn't blow up. Methyl alcohol and ethyl alcohol sound a lot alike. One you can drink and have a good time, the other will kill you stone dead.
The danger of explosion is extreme. These labs are mixing many toxic chemicals, and when those chemicals are put together, they can result in some significant explosions and fires.
Methamphetamine labs have, been reduced, but they're not gone. But manufacturers really only been about 10% of our problem over the past 10 years, and there's still a limited supply of methamphetamine coming into the state of Minnesota.
Super labs, most of them located in other countries, produce huge quantities of meth that are trafficked into every corner of the United States. In many instances, meth users become meth dealers in order to sustain their addictions, furthering the spread of meth throughout communities.
My name is Brian Andrews. I manage a business that I'm going to soon be part owner of. I've got a family, wonderful family now, and I'm a recovering meth addict. I was senior class president in high school. I was a homecoming king. I was an honor student. It couldn't be me. Let me tell you that I knew that my dad died from this. It made me completely anti-drug, but it also desensitized me to a lot of things. I wanted to know what it was that my dad was willing to give his life for. What could be so strong that he'd continue using it until his body couldn't take it anymore. When we did use it, and it was to do something fun, whether it was we were at the bars or playing dice or cards or just at a party, it was for fun. The cycle went very quick for me. I started selling, from 2 ounces to quarter pounds, and quarter pounds to half pounds, and just as fast as I could get it, I could sell it. Not long after that, it wasn't so fun anymore.
The addictive cycle starts, whereas instead of you having to go out and make yourself feel good by eating, sleeping, maybe doing something pleasurable, instead you bypass doing those things to make you feel better by using something artificial like a methamphetamine, which would go right straight to your reward center.
Meth takes away an individual's drive to participate in life.
Meth users are totally focused on getting more meth. Things that used to matter, like family and work, don't matter anymore. This new focus is costly for them, personally, and for all of us.
To support their drug habits, it's estimated that a meth user will commit 5 to 7 crimes a week. It is the single biggest drain on our criminal justice system in our state. Last year in Dakota County alone, 20% of all the felonies we charged were related to methamphetamine use directly. That means the sale, manufacture, or possession of methamphetamine. It doesn't count all of the other crimes associated with meth use, such as thefts and robberies and burglaries and domestic violence and sexual assaults and even murders. When you add in all these other crimes, I estimate that between 30 to 35% of all the crime in my county last year was the result of methamphetamine.
A person might be the victim of the methamphetamine epidemic and not even know it. You could be burglarized, your credit card stolen and used, and that crime is fueled by a methamphetamine addict.
A meth high enables the user to stay awake and focused on minute tasks for hours and even days. This makes them adept at crimes that require great attention to detail.
They can hack into computers, wash checks, even piece together shredded documents to glean personal information to use for identity theft.
Quite typically, people who are abusing methamphetamine are also abusing prescription medications, and they're supporting their habits by committing identity theft type crimes. They've assumed identities of other persons. They may have driver's licenses in those people's names. They have social security cards. We had one particular case where we identified 72 victims of identity theft.
But staying awake and high for days has many other consequences.
Last year in 2005, 3 of our motor vehicle crashes, just in the counties that we cover, were positive for methamphetamine. So it's a little scary when you think about driving on the road and there are people who are driving under the influence of methamphetamine.
I'd gotten so bad I'd fall asleep driving, and I had to drive like 2 hours. I'd wake up and people would be driving in the ditches to avoid me. I almost killed a whole bunch of people. A lot of times, just falling asleep driving. I drove a big boom truck.
Ellen Anderson was driving home from the grocery store when an 18-year-old meth user who'd been up for 3 days came across the center line and hit her car head-on. Ellen was killed. And it happened right here.
We had 2 murders last year in Dakota County that were directly related to methamphetamine use. One was a very violent crime in Burnsville, where a young man who was paranoid and out of control by using methamphetamine was kind of hallucinating and actually thought his aunt was someone else and ended up cutting her throat with a very large knife. A very violent crime. Another crime that a lot of people don't realize is actually murder is providing methamphetamine to someone who overdoses on the substance. If you do that, if you give someone methamphetamine or any other drug and they overdose and die as a result, that's called third-degree murder in Minnesota, and you will be prosecuted for it.
Deadly crimes make the headlines, but tragic cases are just the tip of the iceberg. Meth users make many destructive decisions, and sadly, well-meaning people who try to cover for them may often just make matters worse.
If I needed money, she would give me money, but I wouldn't tell her it was for, getting meth supplies. I would say I'm hungry, When I got a DUI and I did a hit and run, and she took the rap for that.
One of the problems with enabling overall is not putting any expectations on your children, maybe covering for them when they've done something, maybe money-wise you're paying for a bounce check, or you're maybe taking a speeding ticket or something just to keep them out of legals because they've already had enough problems.
She wanted to keep me happy so that I wouldn't have to use, was her thinking,
you're actually really enabling and you're actually hurting that person, because there are now no consequences for their bad drug behavior. So what incentive is there for them to quit?
If we stop someone from using meth, or if we treat a methamphetamine addict, it obviously has a positive effect on that addict, but it has a ripple effect beyond that. It helps the addict's family, and it helps the community. It means one more contributing member of our society.
You know, it's not just one person that's affected. The person using isn't just the only one affected. It's that person, the next person, the next person. You know, I've dealt drugs too. Anywhere between 600 to 1,000 people, different people. And that's in quantity, you know, from little quarter grams to ounces. And for each one of the quantities that I sold, you can expect that they sold to 50 to 100 other people. I was just one dealer. When I drive to and around the area that I used to live, it's just people are walking around just pale. You know, it's like something out of a movie. Everybody looks like zombies. One person has an impact.
When a person first starts using meth, it often gives them an incredible high that keeps them awake and makes them feel invincible. You can see hints of the physical effects on a person's body just by looking at their dilated pupils. But the toxic chemicals and the lifestyle that goes along with using meth takes a terrible toll on a person's body.
In our emergency department, we tend to see anywhere from 30 to 50 patients in a month who are presenting with some type of problem associated with meth. Meth can affect just about any organ system in the body, actually. Not only skin and heart and brain, but your kidneys can be affected as well, to a point where they basically will shut down. If you can think of an organ system in the body, you'll probably end up having a side effect from meth, especially if you use it chronically.
There tend to be these injuries on the hands and arms. Well, they're called crank bugs. And the sensation that the meth user has is that there are bugs under their skin. And it's unbelievable the amount of damage that they'll do to themselves trying to dig out these imaginary bugs.
I would take like a pocket knife or something that would fold up, and I would dig at my skin and dig the freckle or dig, the little blemish in my skin out. And I would do it for hours, 7-8 hours at a time. So that's like a whole work day.
One of the other things that we see looking just externally at the body is what's called meth mouth. And the teeth are in terrible shape. The gums sometimes are bleeding or look infected.
I had 13 teeth left in my mouth, and I had to go and I took $24,000 loan to fix these and to get some teeth back here because I don't have any. So I had to get crowns and all back here. And there's still a ton of work to do on my teeth. And I can remember when I was using, I'd be smoking some meth and, a part of my tooth would fall out. And I'd spit it in my hand. Oh, my teeth fell out. Drop it on the floor and keep smoking. Didn't care.
One of the side effects of methamphetamine is that it's a real appetite suppressant, which is partly why it's so attractive to women. And we've seen some methamphetamine users who are so thin that they look emaciated like a cancer patient, but it's due to methamphetamine.
I fluctuate 120 to 125, and I'm 5'2". And that's what I've been since all my life. But when I started using, I dropped, my lowest weight was 86 pounds, which is like skin and bones, and my skin color would be like a olive green, and whenever I would sweat, I would smell like anhydrous. I reeked. That's all you could smell on me.
Methamphetamine ages people. It makes their skin look bad. It rots their teeth. It causes their heart to age at an accelerated rate. One of the most common long-term complications of methamphetamine is hardening of the arteries, or atherosclerotic coronary artery disease is the medical term. And I can remember a case of a 33-year-old woman, so she's young and she's female, which are not normally people who get heart disease, who had 80 to 85% narrowing of 2 of her coronary arteries. That's like an 80-year-old man.
What we know from physiology is that when you increase epinephrine secretion, you decrease appetite and thirst. So you're not eating, you're not drinking. The body needs to have fuel to do everything that the brain is telling it that it wants to do. And when you've burned up available blood sugar, the body will start to metabolize fat. When you metabolize fat, your cholesterol goes up, triglycerides go up. You have people that have a lot of serum cholesterol with a high cardiac output, you're a heart attack waiting to happen.
Some of the complications of using methamphetamine are that it elevates heart rate, it elevates blood pressure, and it elevates body temperature. Our bodies are designed to stay at 98.6. It's probably the most regulated of all of the functions of our body. Increased body temperature can actually cause sudden death, hyperthermia.
The first-time users can, in fact, have an elevated temperature, which can get up to 108 degrees. And if they go into a cardiac arrest, the chance of resuscitating that patient is very slim or almost non-existent.
We'll see them at the scene and their body will still be warm even though they've been dead for several hours.
The meth patient may present to the emergency department with what he presumes to be a persistent headache, or he may get a sudden headache. We tend to worry that meth could have caused a stroke, which could mean bleeding in the brain.
One of the saddest cases we had that involved meth was a 15-year-old girl who got methamphetamine from friends and became sick, but they didn't want to call for medical care right away, so they ended up just kind of watching her for a while, and she got worse and worse, and they eventually dumped her in an emergency room where she couldn't be resuscitated. She ended up dying, and it may have been the first time she ever used meth. One of the things that's so scary about methamphetamine is, unlike some drugs where if you just take a little, you won't die, but if you take a lot, you'll die, with methamphetamine there's no safe level. Even a small amount of methamphetamine can kill somebody.
Why does meth have these consequences on the body? It's because of the amazing change that happens in a person's brain, chiefly related to dopamine, a chemical neurotransmitter that regulates body functions.
Methamphetamine comes in and causes a pronounced, much greater expression of dopamine there than normally occurs. That is why the heart rate and the blood pressure and the pulse and everything rev up as high as they do. All of us have this endogenous biochemical response we have to stress. It's called the fight or flight response. And what methamphetamine does is it takes that built-in response that we all have to stress and tension, and it hyper-stimulates it. Normal fight or flight response will be a couple of minutes to get you into safety from whatever the perceived threat is, and then all those body systems start to shut down. With methamphetamine, you take that same response system and you dial it up to 11 for 6-7 hours at a time.
In addition to regulating how our bodies function physically, dopamine also regulates how we feel by controlling the pleasure centers of the brain.
The limbic system, which is the reward center of the brain, fires on dopamine and a couple of other neurotransmitters.
Cocaine produces about 100 to 350 units of dopamine. However, methamphetamine produces as much as 1,250 units of dopamine.
It's like the difference between getting hit with a fist and getting hit with a truck.
What the limbic system does is tells you what's good, what's bad, what's pleasurable, what's unpleasurable, what's fun, what's not. And it does the same thing in there. It hyperstimulates an arousal response in there. So you're taking a drug that revs up all of your core body systems, and at the same time, chemically, your brain tells you that I like this is good, this is fun, this is enjoyable. So about 8 hours later, when those body systems start to shut down, at the same time, the brain is telling you, I don't like it when these systems start to shut down. So what you're going to do is you're going to fix up again so you don't feel bad, you don't feel depressed, you don't feel sick. The systems rev up again, so too does the sense of pleasure rev up again. But methamphetamine is more fun than nature ever designed you to have. There comes a point in use where you are no longer using for the effect of the drug itself, you're using simply to not be in withdrawal, which for a lot of people is the functional definition of addiction. You're not using to get high anymore, you're using simply to not be sick.
There's a tremendous rush, then there's the high that may last up to 8 to 10 hours. But some people will go back and try and continue to smoke to try and search for that rush again, because that's what people like the most.
When I was using meth, I was a waitress, and to make sure I would get all the meth that I wanted or needed in, I would go out into the people and I would, "Hi, I'm Amy, what can I get for you to drink?" They'd say a Pepsi and a water. And then before I go do that, I'd run in the bathroom and use drugs, come back, get their Pepsi and water, then I'd say, "Okay, what would you like to eat?" They'd tell me. Before I'd hang the ticket, I'd go back in, take a hit and then hang their ticket and then go take another hit, and then their food would come out. I'd bring it out, and before I would even think about checking on them or, say that anything else I can get you, if they said I needed ketchup or something, okay, I'll get that right out to you. After I'd go and get my hit, I'd make sure that I got high before they would get anything.
One of the bad things about methamphetamine is people can become addicted so easily. We call it animally addictive.
One of the rules of thumb of withdrawal is that its signs and symptoms are the opposite of the signs and symptoms of intoxication. So if you're taking a drug, methamphetamine, that keeps you awake for days on end, suppresses appetite, suppresses thirst, makes you euphoric and giggly and high, when you're in withdrawal from it, you'll see the exact opposite.
Coming down was, if you can imagine, getting kicked in the stomach 75 times, and the depression, the downside is, like just anybody you ever cared about, everybody is just dying all the way around you. That's what it felt like.
When I was in that state, if somebody would have said, "I'll give you a gram of meth," which I was using 7 grams, it would have been a tease. If they would have said, "I'm going to give you a gram of meth if you kill him," I would kill them.
Their body is trying to come back to normal, trying to come back to homeostasis or its average. And what happens with consistent use is what is average for that person changes. So when you stop use, your brain has to, in a very literal sense, chemically and neurologically rewire itself to be able to function now in the absence of methamphetamine. When we talk about reduction of dopamine in the brain, if you think of it as an onion, right? An onion's made up of layers of skin. So when you start to peel away those layers of skin, you have less than you originally started with. So if the amount of dopamine you have available at initial use is X, with continued use you have less and less available dopamine. So by the time you're done with a 6-7 day run, your amount of dopamine is less than it was when it started. And with continued days and weeks and months of use, the body is busy replenishing dopamine, but it can only do it so fast. The good news is we know a lot about what happens with abnormal levels of dopamine in the brain. The bad news is why we know about it.
Abnormal levels of dopamine are evident in 2 well-known diseases, Parkinson's and schizophrenia. Parkinson's patients have low levels of dopamine in their brains, which can cause uncontrollable shaking. Schizophrenia patients have high levels of dopamine, which causes aggressiveness, hallucinations, and paranoia. Meth addicts have abnormally high and low levels of dopamine in their brains throughout their use, and often show symptoms of both of these disorders.
One case that came to our emergency department was a patient who was on methamphetamine. He was hallucinating, thought that he was being persecuted by the FBI, and he would actually see shadows of these people in his wall or at the window, and occasionally would see them in the ceiling. It was a real thing for him.
They look for all the world like they have a diagnostic traumatic brain injury, such as you find in motor vehicle accidents. They'll have noted deficits in short and long-term memory. There is very little to no higher executive functioning, very low impulse control. They look like people that have traumatic brain injuries because they basically do. It just happens to be substance-induced rather than ricocheting their forehead off a dashboard.
Sometimes I just feel like I'm stupid because it makes your brain, it just feels like it's melted away or something. I remember focusing on something and getting so distracted that there was this one table in my room that had 4 items. I rearranged the same table for 7 hours. For what, I don't know. And there's not much you can do with 4 items in a little table, but I did. I just would sit and tweak on little things, and that's when it wasn't fun anymore.
Positive emission tomography, which is called a PET scan, has showed in methamphetamine abusers a decrease in their dopamine transport system, which leads to motor slowing, cognitive impairment.
You'll see that there's a noted reduction in some of those pretty colors there. What that means is that there is a noted reduction in neurologic activity going on. An individual with this type of a brain scan is somebody who's going to appear somewhat lethargic and anhedonic and depressed. The third one down you're going to notice, identified as 14 months abstinence, you're starting to see a return of some of those pretty colors. The rule of thumb with things like this is the longer you're clean, the more of that stuff will come back. It is very individualized how much of it comes back or what it looks like when it comes back, but the longer people stay abstinent, the better they are.
With every day of sobriety, I feel like a piece of my life has been given back to me that I should have had.
I began to notice that kids were using meth, and at one time I just calculated out 25% of my patients were addicted to or abused methamphetamine. In our adolescent treatment center, we've had patients tell us that it was easier to get methamphetamine than it was alcohol. They began to use them to self-medicate, something such as depression, to make them feel better. Methamphetamine users who are adolescents are far more impulsive. They wouldn't have maybe as good a support because they possibly have alienated their families. And they're out there in a hopeless state, unable to control the use of this drug. And they're impulsive enough they may actually attempt suicide.
Every meth user interviewed for this documentary has either attempted suicide themselves or knows someone who has.
I felt like pretty much wanted to kill myself, and that was another aspect that I was so against. You know, I would never take my own life.
I was drilling holes in the ceiling of my bedroom looking for a stud to tie a rope because I was going to hang myself. Never in 20 years of drinking had I gotten to a point that I didn't want to live anymore. And 2 years of meth, I got to a point I didn't want to live anymore.
The stakes are higher than just the methamphetamine addict's health. Each case of meth addiction incurs enormous costs, both human and financial, for the surrounding community.
Let's take a typical case of a meth lab bust in Ramsey County. We estimate it'll cost $140,000 to $149,000 just for that one case. When you look at law enforcement costs, social services, cleanup of the environmental damage, prosecution of the offender, and prison. Almost $150,000 for just one case.
The cost to clean up meth labs is enormous. These labs are hazardous waste sites. There's 5 to 7 pounds of hazardous waste that's produced for every pound of meth that's manufactured. And where does that hazardous waste go? It goes down the drains into our water. It goes, fumes and other chemicals that are spilled end up on the floor and the sheetrock on the walls, into the bed clothing, into the other areas of the home. And when these children are crawling and walking and touching these surfaces, it poses extreme danger.
How do you know if someone in your neighborhood may be involved in meth activity? Well, you may notice strange chemical smells, empty bottles with a powdery residue, coffee filters dyed red from the chemical processes, people coming and going for short periods of time at odd hours of the day and night, neighbors using other people's garbage cans instead of their own, windows that are always shuttered or taped over, beware or no trespassing signs. If you're suspicious that meth activity is happening in a home, it is important to alert law enforcement authorities.
The Colorado research told us that meth residues last longer, at higher levels, and farther away from the site of cooking than we really ever had imagined. One of the things that we don't know is what is the no effect level of methamphetamine? What is the level at which meth would be safe? And we simply don't know that because we haven't had enough research.
But the meth user isn't the only one living in these dangerous homes. Too often, children are growing up there as well.
In most cases, 70% of users of any given drug are males, 30% females. The ratio with methamphetamine is 1-to-1. And what that means for us is that the caregivers, the keepers of the family, the women are impacted more, and therefore the children are impacted more.
Methamphetamine crosses the placenta very well. And in the 2 cases that have been reported comparing the concentrations of methamphetamine in the mother's blood and in the baby's blood, the baby actually had a higher concentration of methamphetamine than did the mother. The agitation that we sometimes see, I think, is a direct effect of the methamphetamine, and what we see later, which is the sleepiness, is just an effect of the baby just sort of sleeping off their exposure to the methamphetamine. For example, if a woman continues to use methamphetamine, there's pretty good evidence that it gets into the breast milk. And so if the woman is breastfeeding, she may think she's doing something good for her baby, but she's continuing to expose that child to methamphetamine, which makes the child probably more irritable and more difficult to care for. So we have a drug which we believe is neurotoxic in adults, and it influences nutrition. It causes people not to eat as well, and when they eat, they don't eat well, don't eat a balanced diet. And we have a drug which may cause decreased growth and early delivery. All those factors combined and rolled up really place these babies at an increased risk for long-term developmental and neurological problems.
There's a residential treatment center in Milwaukee for kids who've committed terrible crimes, but they're too young to go to prison. And 70% of children in that facility were exposed to cocaine or methamphetamine.
We still don't have a complete picture of how meth is affecting our communities. One study, however, has examined the problem in Tulsa, Des Moines, Los Angeles, and Honolulu.
The ideal study found that 5% and higher, 5% of all pregnant women were using meth. That's 1 in 20 women, not just drug-using women.
Mothers don't always tell you if they've been using methamphetamine. Some will, but many do not. And the reason they don't is they know that their baby could likely be taken away from them. We know that methamphetamine does have an effect on adults' brains, that the chronic users do have some structural changes that occur within their brains. But it's hard to believe that a baby's brain is more resilient to the injury associated with methamphetamine. There is evidence in that babies who have been exposed to methamphetamine have smaller subcortical regions of their brain, that is below the thinking area, the part that helps us respond, pay attention to what's going on around us, focus on one task despite distractions. Probably the greatest concern that I have for these babies is that once they go home with their mother who is using methamphetamine, the mother probably will continue to use methamphetamine. And in that situation, it puts the baby at enormous risk for neglect or abuse.
It's very important that social workers and prosecutors and law enforcement work together, come out to the homes and see what police officers are seeing at the time of the arrest, because oftentimes it's very difficult to reduce to paper. The odor and the neglect, and I mean, you have to see that firsthand sometimes in order to understand what these children really live with.
When I was using meth was the #1 priority in my life. It came before kids, anything else that was going on. It was the #1 priority. I remember at one point, Logan, my youngest, he used to sit in my lap, and I'd always call him my snugglebug. Hey, Logan, you want a snugglebug? And there was at one point that he said to me, Mom, we're never snugglebugs anymore. And so, it hit me that I don't hug my children very much anymore, and I pulled them up into my lap, and I just didn't even feel the good that I used to feel from holding my kids. And hugs weren't there. Hugs weren't there anymore.
I have bad memories when I was a child of my dad beating my mom. And, believe it or not, I gave my little boy, Logan, I gave him the same exact memories I grew up with. And I know that he'll have them for the rest of his life because I got them for the rest of my life. And they won't go away. He seen me push his mom down and she hit her head and she went unconscious. And he don't say it anymore, but up to about a year and a half ago, I go, what are you thinking about? That time Mom was laying on the floor. You know, his mom is everything to him, and it broke his little heart.
On one particular case, I had a drug-abusing couple come in and report to me one of their friends who had a 33-month-old child had taken this 8-ball of methamphetamine and had eaten it off the table, and they were upset because she was awake for 3 days, and the parents didn't seek any medical treatment for her.
They've done studies on children who've been exposed to meth houses and found that 90% of the kids will have a positive urine drug screen for methamphetamine.
There was a young girl that back when she was about 5 years old, they had resided in Wright County. And at that time, her father was involved with manufacturing methamphetamine. And when she woke up from a nap one day, she saw a cup of liquid sitting on their kitchen table. And she thought it was a cup of juice, and she picked it up and drank it. And it was chemical wash in the cup. When that child was taken into protective custody, they also discovered that she was considered legally blind without glasses, and she did not have glasses.
2 Minnesota children showed up after meth lab seizures with extraordinarily high blood lead counts. They were living in places where there was little food. Lead-based paint chips have a very sweet taste, which is why children eat them. So we had kids who were poisoned with lead, not by meth manufacturing, but by neglect, by being essentially abandoned by their parents.
These kids have to be taken into protective custody and put into foster care and foster homes to protect their safety and welfare.
Anoka County currently has 330 cases open to child protection. 50% of those, which would be 165 cases, are related to parents using methamphetamine.
Teachers often ask us, how do we spot a child from a meth environment in the school? And we say, look for signs of neglect, of trauma. Look for kids who aren't being fed at home, so maybe they steal food or they're extremely hungry. Look for children who don't have normal sleep schedules, so they come to school exhausted. And look for parents whose behavior has changed, who are hostile, paranoid, unavailable to you and unavailable to their kids.
They lack clothing. They lack nurturing. A lot of them are truant from school. We've encountered many kids that ask us, can you just take me to school?
Some of the children that come to us do have some mental health issues. There's been neglect involved. They have attachment issues, separation issues.
And I believe that these are people who really care about their babies, but when they use methamphetamine, they're not themselves. I mean, they lose that perspective of who their baby is and how important that child is to themselves and as an individual. And we want to help the baby and the mother. We don't want to see the mother separated from the baby necessarily, and we certainly don't want to see the mother go to jail. But what we want is that we want to be able to intervene.
We had executed a search warrant and taken a woman's children into protective custody because of their methamphetamine abuse in the home. She came in and wanted to speak with me, and she came to thank me because she was glad that she was getting her life back on track, and she was thankful that somebody looked out for her children when she was unable to do that.
Our goal is that every baby has the right to grow up in an environment which is safe, where they're not going to be neglected and where they're not going to be abused.
What we do to kids before they're born, what we do to kids when they are small, rides them for the rest of their lives. And if we as a society don't respond to meth in any other way except to do our best for the kids, then at least we will prevent that harm.
There is hope. Meth users may feel that they've wasted their lives or that they're too far gone for treatment. But many, many addicts have conquered their dependence on meth. No matter where someone is in life, it is always possible to move beyond the cloud of addiction and start living.
A big issue and deal for me was I didn't think I could be addicted. I didn't think addiction was real. I thought that I could tell myself in my head that I'm not going to use, I'll use this one time and that's it. But then it hit me that I was addicted, and I pretty much gave up hope that my life was over and this was going to be my life and I'm going to be an addict and it's too late to turn my life around. And pretty much everybody I know has thought that too, that, they're not going to get addicted, and then they do, but you can always turn around, always.
We can't incarcerate our way out of this problem. In fact, right now, 1 out of 8 people in our Minnesota prisons are there for meth charges. We spend $22 million a year just to warehouse 1,000 addicts. What if we treated them as well? $6.5 million spent so that they don't come back again and again to our criminal justice system. The fact is that 95% of the people in our prisons will eventually be back on our streets. We can't afford not to treat the addictions that fuel their crimes.
This 4 years has been the best 4 years of my life. It's surreal. It took this sentence to save me.
Everybody's different, everybody's unique, everybody's unusual. Because of that, you'll see people whose depressive symptomology may go away in a day or a week or a month. With other people, it may take a year, 18 months, 2 years. The trick is being able to tailor the treatment plan and the treatment intervention to meet the needs of the people, rather than trying to force the client into the prefabricated idea of how you think they should recover.
I think I would be dead if I didn't stop using now. Because at the rate that I was going, it keeps going, increasing and increasing. I would say now, even after 4 years of not using, there's still days that it comes across my mind that what would it be like if I used, or what? And I just think back, it would be hell. I would lose my kid, I would lose everything that I've ever worked this long for. I actually got my diploma. So I did that, and then I've gotten a year done in college towards my elementary education degree, which is exciting for me. And I'm engaged. He supports me a lot, and we have a new 6-month-old baby named Hunter.
The whole way I live has changed completely. I didn't think I would even have a plant. Well, you can see my plant, it's half dead, but I don't have a green thumb. It's okay though. I'm learning to do other things. I cook, I clean, I work. Who would have thought I would work? That was the hardest thing, I think, was not living the meth life, but living the good life.
Have a nice house in a great neighborhood, manage a business, have a family, go to school. 4.5 years in a lifetime isn't that much.